not so much of a technical player myself. What I do is express. That's what I do.
Hi, and welcome to Beatitude. I'm Clive Morgan.
And I'm Robert Roberts.
We've had a bit of a delay since our last podcast, which was on the Beatles. Since then I've had COVID, so I'm a bit croaky. But yeah, I'm back to tell the tale.
He's back from the dead.
Back from the dead. So so this week's, as we did say last time, we're going to be talking about love. Not the kind that can break your heart, but Love, the band, and in particular the great 1967 album Forever Changes. So yeah, Rob, let's should we still talk a bit about the background?
Yeah, well, Arthur Lee was not actually, considering that he's so defined by being an LA musician, was not born in LA. In fact, he was born in Memphis on March 10th, 1945. And actually, he came full circle and he died on August the 30th, 2006, also in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah, man.
And he spent his early years there with his mother, Agnes Porter, who was a school teacher. And he had a father called Chester Taylor, who was a jazz musician. He was an only child. And he was fascinated by music from a very early age. And he would listen to Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters.
Quite a middle class, we were saying this earlier, weren't we? Quite a middle class upbringing, really.
Yeah, I know, because of like the image of the ghetto dandy. It does sort of
a working class hero.
Yeah, a working class hero. Sort of, it does seem to contradict that. I always wonder if, because his parents separated in the 50s, and obviously he was age 5 when they went to LA and he went with his mother. I was always wondering how much that contributed to his sort of outsider status. Yeah,
which, as we'll sort of detail later with the albums, is all over his lyrics.
Yeah, there's a loneliness and a disenfranchised. He's obviously a feeling of being disenfranchised.
Yeah,
and I wonder how much of a psychological impact that had on him. Actually.
Yeah,
and even being taken away from your place of birth.
Yeah,
how much that has an impact.
We'll talk about his passing. He sadly passed away, as you know, because I keep going on about it. Got to see him live just before he died, a couple of years before he died.
Yeah.
He played the Forever Changes tour in Liverpool.
Yeah.
Amazing gig, really good. But sadly lost to leukemia, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was leukemia. Obviously, after a very turbulent time as well with his prison sentence.
Yeah, because he'd just come out. I think he'd been out of prison a year when he did that tour.
Yeah,
the Forever Changes tour. So he was still, fresh from the cells, as I say.
Interestingly enough, though, also Johnny Eccles, who was another member of Love, who's a guitar player, also was born in Memphis and moved to LA at the same time. They were basically living with each other.
Yeah, good. Didn't they? Yeah, we watched the documentary, didn't we, the other day? Which is great. We've got to put that out there, which is just called the Love Story?
Yeah.
What was that? I don't know if it came out on. Let me have a look now. Was it Rhino or? I'm not sure. No. But you can find this on your local Amazon store. But it's really good, really detailed. There's not much anyway, is there? There's not much footage out there unless you go on YouTube of Love in their prime, around that time.
Yeah.
But that is a great DVD and it's got a lot of information, a lot of stuff we'll cover tonight.
Well, they spent so much time together because of, they were in the high school band together.
Yeah, and their paths crossed, didn't they? They moved, and then when they moved with him.
Eccles said in a recent interview that their family's history went back generations, and that their grandparents knew each other.
It's almost fated, wasn't it?
So that was they must have had a very close bond.
Yeah.
You know, and another person who we pressed upon last time, who popped up last time with the Beatles, was Billy Preston.
Billy Preston
was also a member of that high school, and they all played in a band together.
Amazing. Imagine being in that school.
Which was really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So of course they started out as a house band, didn't they?
Yeah.
So on the LA scene, anyway, they were as went on to become the Grassroots. Played a lot. Like twice a night were they playing? I think
they were playing twice a day, and it was a lot of blues and jazz as well. You know what I mean? On many occasions, Eccles refers to it as serendipity.
Yeah.
Together.
Yeah.
I was listening to that interview with him, and he always uses the word serendipity. So there's a sort of like fate to it as well. So that's quite interesting.
And there might be a lot of listeners to this that have not, have never come across a band Love, because they aren't. We talk a lot about great 60s bands, and they aren't massively popular. Forever Changes is, to me, is one of those albums that not everyone has heard, but everybody should hear, because it is a classic album. But they're not heralded as, when you think about how big they were in 60s LA.
Yeah, in 60s LA they were huge. In 60s LA,
probably the biggest band in LA, along with the Byrds.
Yeah, the Byrds, and with the Byrds touring and promoting their records, there was a vacuum, which they really did take over in the sort of LA scene, in the clubs, in places like Brave New World, in Hullabaloo, and in particular Beatitude, which was by a place called Cosmos Alley. And this place was dotted with celebrities and musicians, the quality of people like Mick Jagger, Brian Jones, Bob Dylan.
Yeah, they were a musicians band as well, weren't they? A lot of musicians loved Love.
And they did go on to play larger venues like the Whiskey A Go Go on Sunset Strip in LA.
They were a house band there as well.
Yeah, they were a house band there as well. Yes.
And then a lot of people talk a lot about the Doors as being the big band in LA around that time. But if it wasn't for Love, the Doors would have probably never made it. We need to sort of put that story out there, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, it was at the behest of Arthur Lee. And Johnny Eccles to Jack Holzman, who was the president of Elektra at the time.
Yeah, the record label they were on.
The record label Elektra, which was a folk label, and had ventured into electronic music with the Butterfield Blues Band.
Yeah.
And as the Butterfield Blues Band played more with commerciality, Holzman wanted to have a rock band.
Yeah.
And as he went round America, he found Love, and he wanted to sign Love. And at that point in time, when Love were actually releasing their first albums, the first album Love and the second album Da Capo, and at this point in time he was looking to branch out, Arthur Lee and Johnny Eccles instructed them to check out this band called The Doors.
Because they were, they were probably the only, weren't they? And they're still one of the very few multiracial bands.
Well, Arthur Lee likes to, and I know he likes to trumpet himself, but Arthur Lee likes to say they were the first in the multiracial band. Which I'm looking at the Zappa documentary. You could see he had many multiracial blues bands, but none of them ever gained commercial success.
Yeah.
But I think that
there was a few soul bands around, weren't there? Like the Love Affair and bands like that were kind of.
But
mixed,
I think as a cohesive unit, they were the first. The Ghetto Get Dandies was the first to create this multiracial, interracial.
And do you think that in some ways hindered them as far as their success went, or?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, I agree.
I do think there's a lot of hindrance with.
Because obviously the Doors come along. Yeah, so we'll go back to that story. But Jack Holzman went to see the Doors at Whiskey A Go Go. With Arthur Lee, because Arthur Lee was a big fan of the Doors, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, and one thing that has to be stressed is that they were actually friends as well.
Yeah.
They hung out with each other at the castle.
Yeah, there was a lot of mutual respect there.
There was a lot of mutual respect. There's some reports, if you read stuff like Mojo and Uncut, as if Jim Morrison wanted to be.
Yeah. So of course they signed the Doors. Elektra signed the Doors, And basically, it was almost to Love's detriment because they put a lot of their money into the Doors. These 4 white lads,
Yes,
that would play the game, that would tour, that would basically, as a band, also would do as they were told, which is something Alpha Lee. You could never say that he never played the game, did he? He didn't. They never toured outside LA.
Yeah.
They refused, just point blankly refused.
I think that you have to sort of say something about the sort of cultural context of what it must have been like to be black in America at that point in time, considering that it had only been 1964, with certain Kennedy had been forced through certain race.
Yeah.
Which had a dramatic effect. Obviously there was civil rights, there was Dr. Martin Luther King, and that was a very...
And then we also, you had Vietnam as well at the time.
You had Vietnam at the time.
The majority, 80% conscription was, working class
one of the
black.
interesting things, perhaps,
youth.
whilst the protests against the Iraq War didn't take so much of a turn and twist as the Vietnam War, because there wasn't conscription.
Yeah.
Now, there were so many people who were being young men, white, black, Asian, who were being conscripted.
A lot of musicians as well.
And a lot of musicians, and as we can see, and as we will talk about, that this would have a major impact on love as well, and on the music.
This wasn't like G.I. Blues with Elvis.
Or the Everly Brothers.
Yeah, exactly. This was real war, man. This was you ain't coming back.
No, I think, there is a story, isn't there, that they all were actually taken to be conscripted, and they got so high on microdots. Yeah. And they did this purposely. They
declared them as insane.
And they declared them as insane and not fit for purpose.
Yeah. So, and I think, especially the album we're going to talk about in particular, Forever Changes, it's all over. Even though it's an uplifting, it's a beautiful album. It's... I take it as positive in so many ways, from the very first moment I listened to it. But all over it, there's a lot of darkness in the lyrics, especially Alpha Lee's lyrics. Around that time, the paranoia, the feeling of the party was coming to an end almost, and foreseeing what was to come later on with Charlie Manson and
he charted the darker side of the counterculture.
Yeah, he did, didn't he?
And I think as a black man, he felt like an outsider.
Yeah.
And dare I say that? And I think that he always felt like an outsider, and I think that there was something with Vietnam that he felt was amiss, that he didn't feel was right, that this optimism, this idea of peace and love with Vietnam, and of course what was happening, there were race riots in LA at the time.
Yeah, because history remembers, especially the Sunset Strip, all the flower power and all the... Yeah, but I can imagine.
Let's face it, Forever Changes is not Scott McKenzie's. We're going to San Francisco.
Exactly. No, it isn't. And that's a good thing.
And that's a very good thing, because I think that's a dire record, to be honest with you.
So the first 2 albums, you had the self-titled album, Just Love in 1966, and then Da Capo followed shortly after. Da Capo with a wonderful 7 and 7 Is. Which is
an
story in itself,
terrific song. Which actually, one interesting fact about 7 and 7 is that
the birthdays.
It was their biggest hit.
Yeah, it was. It was probably their only hit, wasn't it?
And it's.
But then we say hit. What did it get to?
33
in the chart. So it's still not.
If you love garage rock like the Seeds and the Standells.
Yeah, it was of that ilk.
And love aggressive songs.
Yeah.
With vocals that are really spat out and angry, then I think that you will love it, because I think it is a forerunner for punk.
Yeah.
I think when I've read that the Clash were fans, and I was like, well, did they like Forever Changes? And
though you think of Sandinista.
7 Is, I think, fuck yeah.
Think of Sandinista by the Clash. I mean, that's that's a lot. There's Forever Changes over that. A lot.
Some people say that there was 100 takes for that.
What, 7 and 7 Is?
Yeah, that there was real issues with the drums.
Yeah, it's to me it's the apocalyptic ending Is it almost like that sort of almost lets in what's to come with Forever Changes?
It initially
it's just
began
like that
with
bang.
a surf guitar idea, 7/7.
Did it?
Yeah, and one of the interesting facts is there was a bass pedal distortion from Vox that came out, and Kenny Forsey got hold of it, which was a volume booster, and it gave a sort of bass
sound.
sort of
You don't hear that sound anyway.
Yeah, it was
do
a
you?
very unique sound.
Yeah.
And,
Which is why you can't cover it.
yeah, because the Velvets tried to. But Sterling Morrison said that they failed, so that's quite interesting.
But yeah, I mean, yeah. If anybody hasn't, if you listen to anything off Da Capo, listen to that track because it is, and it does open for what's going to come with Forever Changes. I think anyway, with the ending of it in particular, and that lovely guitar that leads out after the apocalyptic explosion, almost like a nuclear bomb.
Yeah, no,
You know,
it is, isn't it? It's like
beautiful.
It's absolutely fantastic with that explosion, and then it goes into that blues fade out, coda, which is absolutely fantastic. Very disciplined drumming, but they didn't crack it straight away because Arthur had a pop at it as well.
Yeah, I heard this. Yeah, because Arthur would play every instrument anyway, wouldn't he?
It's got a really fascinating story because of. He had written it about a girlfriend called Anita entitled 7 and 7 Is, which centred around the fact that they both had been born on March the 7th.
Yeah.
And there's an autobiographical element in the corner with an ice cream cone, the lyric, is his mother would punish him basically with a dunce cap and put him in the corner. And that's what that lyric represents.
I think most of his lyrics, you know, like all great lyricists, was so autobiographical anyway. Not just of like his life and how he lived his life, but what he was seeing around him. I think Arthur Lee, as a lyricist, was a great people watcher. Yeah. You know, he was always observing, almost like a soothsayer, seeing what was going on around him, being able to put it into words, and then to create music. That was,
sort of sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's all over Forever Changes, isn't it? There's a lot of that. Just sitting, you know, he's like watching, and he's taking it in, he's seeing where people are going wrong, what he thinks, but there's always that, I don't know, it's judgmental, but it's not to the point of being pious or pompous, is it?
I don't think so. I think that it's very interestingly how he plays with duality is interesting. You know, you can paint me white, you can paint me yellow. Yeah. And those different, and the racial idea of being painted white as well, from the black man. Yeah. And the sort of, the duality of it, and the sort of, he won't let you go down easy roads. No. He won't make you make easy moral choices. No. It's kind of.
He likes to take you to the dark corners.
Yeah.
Come with me into the dark side, and we'll look at it together. But we'll find a solution. We'll find a way out of it. Yeah, I think there was always hope in his lyrics.
I think that he did actually believe in the maxim of peace and love.
Yeah, I do too. But I think he saw a lot of fakes. He saw a lot of people, and then what it was at that time, you know, you saw that's when you knew the party was coming to an end. When Haight-Ashbury, when, you know, the Sunset Strip, when it got flooded by weekend hippies. Yeah. The dream was over. Trippers. Yeah, the day trippers. The dream was over, and it was kind of killed it. And I think Arthur saw that.
It's quite interesting, if anybody's really interested. There is a Paul Lester article from May 2002 in The Guardian. It's called Hard Times. And he actually says that he is an intimidating figure, yet a flamboyant one. The ghetto dandy, the hippie with the gangster attitude, is what it begins his article with. And he goes on to sort of say, like, it's sort of he sort of suggests the apocalyptic dread that was to come with the Tet Offensive, with Charles Manson, and the advent of Nixon. The paranoia of that age, which is quite an interesting one. And if anybody would like to read it, it's a very interesting article. As it says, a black man imitating a white Englishman imitating a black American.
and you know the life they were living there, because they lived together as a band in the castle, didn't they? This great big mansion up on the hills in LA, where other musicians would come and visit. So they lived in this bubble anyway, I think, you know, and I think everybody turned up there, didn't they? From the Birds, Janis Joplin, Hendrix,
Zappa's band.
I mean, it was the place to hang out, wasn't it, in LA? And I think this is how respected and how loved the band were,
Sorry
in
to
particular.
use that term.
Yeah. And yeah, how much...
I always say I love love, and I always sort of think that's
Love.
I love love.
Well, there's that talk about the album Forever Changes, isn't there? Because apparently you heard that's where you got the idea for the title from. He, again, the voyeuristic Arthur watching a couple breaking up, and the girl shouted after this bloke, "You said we were forever," and the bloke shouted back, "Well, forever changes, baby." And Arthur just took that
And he went in, and he just went with
as
it.
the album title.
The castle has interesting.
Yeah,
place where
it
they
does.
live together.
Yeah.
It's a mansion, and many people have reported as being Bela Lugosi's house, which isn't true. Unfortunately.
No.
I wish it was Bela.
Yeah.
But it's still quite cool because it actually might have been the home of Lillian Gish,
Yeah.
who moved to Paris.
When we watched the documentary, there's the great bit in there where Arthur goes back, 2004, 2005,
Yeah.
and he revisits it, doesn't he? And it's this posh, it's all been done up now, and he's walking around it going, well, that was where I used to sleep. That was, you can imagine it then. The swimming pool then was just probably filled with, I don't know, needles and hashish, whereas now it's this beautiful
Jim Morrison punching people.
Yeah,
Well, that's what they had to kick him out because he'd get too rowdy.
For Jim.
He'd get too drunk. Yeah, and Arthur Lee claimed that Jim Morrison punched Brian McLean in the face, and they had to kick him out. Which I thought
I can imagine that though. Can you not imagine that with Jim Morrison?
No, I thought that was hilarious. And Arthur Lee found it hilarious. Because what I did like about it, on one level maybe it was very aspirational, and maybe on one level it sort of seemed to be about property and
Yeah, but it was almost like
but at the same time with the Lillian Gish connection, I do sort of find it romantic in the sense of old Hollywood glamour, you know what I mean, and entwined with the history of LA.
They almost created their own little ghetto there, didn't they? Just this little musicians ghetto, almost just their own little Harlem. Just they did what they wanted, recorded what they wanted, and created some great ideas there. And how many albums and bands got together because of the castle?
Was formed in there, which has great songs on it. She Comes in Colours, which obviously
I love She Comes
many
in Colours.
people say influenced the Rolling Stones. She's a Rainbow, so that's quite interesting.
You can hear that, can't you?
I can hear that.
Yeah.
Maybe some people would pick up the baton and argue with me.
Yeah.
But that's fair enough. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And I personally can hear it, and I think it's quite an interesting point, actually, to be honest.
So we do say go out and listen to those first two albums first, but the main focus, because otherwise we'd be here for hours. The main focus is Forever Changes.
We had to trim it down.
But I mean, because we could talk about Forever Changes for a month.
Yeah.
So we get to 67, and Arthur almost has this epiphany, lyrically and musically, that he's going to create this album, this orchestral album, which is completely different to any of the two albums they've done before, but it's still got that love stamp all over it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But it just... I don't know how you can explain this album. Well, let's talk about when we first heard it. I know when I'd never heard anything. I still haven't to this day. Never heard an album like it in my life.
When did you first hear it then?
Probably about 25 years ago.
Where were you?
In heaven.
Strung out.
Yeah. But I just remember thinking, wow, I'd never heard anything like it. From the opening strings. Yeah, do you?
Yeah, because you played it to me.
Oh yeah, we were up in Devil's Bridge.
Yeah. I was always very fascinated by it. I was always very...
Weren't we on mushrooms?
Not if my mother's listening.
No, we weren't. We really weren't. I beg your money. Cut that out. Anyway, God, it was, wasn't it? I remember putting it on.
Yeah.
Putting it on vinyl on, man.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it was an absolutely...
But it isn't, is it? It's not, again, if you haven't heard the album now, well, we'll do our best to try and explain it, but all we can really say is after this podcast, go and listen to it, whatever format you can, Spotify, on vinyl, on CD.
Go and listen to it.
Go and listen to it.
And if maybe your opinion is of a low opinion, go and re-listen to it.
Yeah, and again and again.
Yeah.
And if you still don't like it, then stop listening to music because you haven't got a soul.
That's telling them like it is, Clive.
But I mean, at the time when it was released, it didn't do well at all, did it? What was it, 100? When it came out in America, 154.
We went to 155 in the Billboard
155 in the Billboard charts. It did a bit better over here, didn't it? I think, but it was still only like 60 or something like that in our charts. It wasn't a big hit, was it, when it came out? That must have crushed after.
Flying back to the racial context.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting, really, because of segregation had not long ended in the States.
Yeah.
So you're putting it into context of how, which is a social political division between blacks and whites. Segregation was outlawed by the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Wow. Forever Changes was only 3 years after that.
Yeah.
The Voting Rights Act of 65, which changed voting rights for blacks. And the Warren Court had barred segregation, decided to overturn school segregation in the United States. And the Property Values Act of 68, that was forever.
Oh, wow.
That was
I think they've been living in the car. Been living in the castle for 2 years.
So no wonder he didn't want to go out on tour.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Now, how much of that?
I think there's half of that is just Arthur's
and ending segregation in the
pig-headedness,
army,
because it couldn't be asked.
They'd only just ended segregation in the army, and probably only to allow people to
send
the people to Vietnam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know, mate. I know.
And there was still de facto segregation, which actually means you were breaking the law.
Yeah.
You were still trying to implement segregation. So this was happening probably in the South.
Yeah.
So
but you think about
was the climate that he was living in.
But this was happening when you go back 4 years before then, when sax musicians were travelling all over America. Steve Cropper playing with Otis Redding.
Yeah.
The issues they faced. And then we lost a lot of great musicians because of that. Shoddy aeroplanes, shoddy buses.
Surely there's a sense that Jimmy came. I'm not saying that this country's any better. I don't want to go on some sort of
But why Jimmy came over here?
Sanctimonious rant that this country is far less racist than the States or something. Yeah. But why did Hendrix come over here? Sort of the play.
Why did Marley come over here?
No, exactly.
No.
I totally agree. Sorry, I took you right out of
No, it's okay. No, it's important we get this context, the racial context, because that, it's a big thing, and it still is to this day. But I mean, Love, and Arthur Lee in particular, as a musician, was one of the forerunners of that.
I think there are definitely psychological facts, individual psychological factors to Arthur Lee of why he didn't tour. Fear of failure.
And
I also
had his own pig-headedness.
And a little bit, and a two-fingered salute to the man that didn't want to play the game as well, which I quite.
Because I've always had that two fingers up to everyone. There's that great story when they got their advance from Elektra Records. They got a £5,000 advance, and Jack Holman gave it to Arthur Lee. The rest of the band looked around. Arthur disappeared. He came back an hour later in a £4,500 sports car with 2 seats and chucked £100 each at the rest of the band members and went, there you go. They couldn't even get in the car to have a ride, now it's spoken. Now he's no longer here. Johnny Eccles talks about it a lot, and he talks about him with fondness. But at the time, I bet a lot of people wanted to punch Arthur. It wasn't always the nicest character, we can't just sit here and however much I love his music.
Influence do you think them being the first integrated band is? Do you think it has an influence on the experience, on Sly?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Prince goes right through.
Yeah.
Right through to today, as you were saying the other day.
I take
Andre
a stab
3000.
You can hear Andre 3000 the Ghetto Dandy. Really. I think that's the sartorial, the style has an influence.
But I suppose Arthur Lee himself would then cite Little Richard, would then cite it all comes full circle,
Mick
doesn't
Jagger.
it? Yeah. So anyway, we get to 67. So Arthur comes in with these ideas, this album he wants to record, And we get to the recording. Now, there's issues around... I think we should talk about Brian McLean before we go on to the album, because integral part, the guitarist of Love, integral part of the band.
The man who wrote Alone Again All.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
which in some ways is their greatest.
Great guitarist.
Yeah.
Probably that guitarist, and he was a vocalist.
And they found him as he was the roadie for the Byrds, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there was always tensions between him and Arthur, wasn't there?
Something
a lot
to
of
do with
tensions.
women.
Yeah, often the case.
They both loved...
But they were like dark and light, weren't they? You know, we see that lyrically. The two songs that Brian writes on the album, you know, Alone Again or and Old Man, compared to a lot of Arthur's songs. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? The difference. And I think that works perfectly in the same way.
Look at Alone Again All, really, where the sort of genesis for McLean to write that was a tribute to his mother's flamenco dancing, and predates the band.
Yeah,
which is interesting. Now, you wouldn't have maybe Arthur being nostalgic or sentimental.
No, Arthur was never sentimental, was he?
No, he wasn't. He was much more hard-boiled, wasn't he? Yeah.
But then it worked. I think it also works, and I think, you know, and also like Brian's playing kind of softened a lot, you know, in the same way Lennon, McCartney, Coxon and Albarn, you know, all great bands have that, where, you know, that distinctive difference that balances everything, you know, the rough and the smooth, the dark and the light, and, you know, whatever issues they may have had over women, over music, whatever. Yeah, I don't think it would have been the same band without Brian McLean.
It's like maybe it's
Arthur was the leader, wasn't he?
Yeah,
without
maybe
doubt.
it's a bit of a cliche, but there was a chemical thing going on.
There was, definitely.
There was definitely some sort of what's the word I'm looking for?
Love.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. No, I was sort of thinking of alchemy. Sort of thinking.
Yeah, there's definitely some alchemy. Yeah. Alchemy's all over that record, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they go to the studio, and the first few sessions are awful, aren't they? They're not getting the sound that Arthur can hear in his head. They've got orchestral arrangements were done separately anyway, but musically they weren't playing it right. So they had to bring in the Wrecking Crew, didn't they?
Yeah.
So Jack Horsman brings in the Wrecking Crew, Don Randy.
And we had a debate, didn't we?
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Because I actually thought that you could hear their influence on, in particular, And More Again and The Daily Planet.
Yeah.
And I thought that they sounded better.
Yeah. See, I think musically, I agree. I think musically better because they're tight as fuck musicians. They played David Axelrod, they played all over soul records. We're talking Carol Kay on bass, Don Randy.
Yeah.
Who else? Blaine.
Yeah.
Great musicians, the best musicians around, which is why they were session musicians.
Yeah.
But I think, this is where we disagree, don't we? Because you can tell it's not Love. That's my thing, because Love had that lovely loose tightness. You can tell it's there. Love had that way of playing that was almost on the off, the offbeat, but it just magical,
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting I'm looking at the album cover now. And it's got 1967. Nothing caught the strangeness of those days or captured the combination of beauty and dread that contained, quite like Love's masterpiece, Forever Changes. And I think that's really true, isn't it? It captures the essence of that album.
Yeah.
It has the optimism of peace and love,
and
of wearing flowers in your hair to cliche. Free love, which was a big part of
But it doesn't sugarcoat it. It tickles the underbelly, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Well, this is a band that actually had a member of the Manson family play with them.
As I say,
Chuck.
As I say,
But they did
sure
pick him
Charlie,
up for Brian McLean.
I'm sure Charlie used to go and stay in the castle anyway. I'm sure he had many a sleepover.
No, man. Chuck spent an evening at Eccles with one of the female contingent of the Manson family.
Yeah.
And he was on the phone to Charlie, and Johnny Eccles goes to him, "Why do you always have to tell him where you are? He's like your dad, man." And goes, "Oh, you can't upset Charlie." And like, I love Johnny Eccles girls. I really hated it because they smelled bad because they never had a bang.
You got to be a clean dandy.
Yeah, because Eccles even said that himself. Because I loved that time, but like, you know what I mean. I really did wish that people would shower. Which I agree with. I love that period in time and a lot of what it stands for. But I do like to have a bang. And if that's wrong, well, fuck you.
So the band weren't cutting it, were they, on these initial sessions? So they got these session musicians in.
There was a lot of trouble, wasn't there? Because of, I think McLean had been promised a side, and Eccles had been
half the album.
a side. It was
Yeah.
going to be a double album,
Yeah.
and due to sort of like record company pressure, this was muted. And it decided that it would just be a single album because they couldn't afford it. And
also because Arthur wanted most of the songs.
And Arthur wanted most, as you can see on Alone Again Off.
Yeah.
Because the mastered version, there's a version recorded with just McLean's vocals, very high in the mix before it was mastered. And before it got mastered, Arthur told them to turn it down and turn his vocals up.
But it works, though. It works beautifully.
It does, and it was also Arthur Lee that added the question mark to Alone Again.
Yeah, that's right.
Which gives it that bit more of a mystery.
So the session band, the Wrecking Crew, they played on And More Again and The Daily Planet, didn't they? Which allegedly Neil Young helped arrange.
Yeah.
Although he denies this, he has actually got a credit on the album for arranger. I don't know why he denies this. They wanted Neil Young to record the album, didn't they?
As it said in that documentary, and it was Arthur Lee that said it, this could be told in 10 different ways.
Yeah,
I think it's really interesting, and you could go quite deep into this about interpretation, really.
But isn't that great? The greatest thing about the best bands is the mythology around them anyway.
Yeah, no, that's true.
I love one of the best bands for that because there are so many different sides.
Because it is the Daily Planet that is thought to be the only track which bears the only traces of Mr. Young and his arrangements.
Yeah.
And he had a hit with the Buffalo Springfield with Expecting to Fly.
Which Bruce Botnick, who engineered this album, also engineered, didn't they?
Yeah, and the band hung out with Neil Young, and they would smoke weed together, and
who wouldn't hang out with Neil Young?
All kinds of things together.
Who wouldn't hang out with Neil Young? Man,
exactly, but the band were reluctant to have him as a producer, and had no idea of his involvement until.
But Neil tells it differently, doesn't he? Yeah. Neil tells it very differently. That it was because he wanted to work on his solo album that he didn't get involved. So again, it's 10 different stories.
Yeah, I know, because Bruce Botnick sort of says that he asked Shaker to come down due to his financial hardship, and he was going to be evicted.
Yeah.
So being penniless and broke, Botnick told him he could get a cut if he came down to produce a song, and then at the sight of Mr. Young, Lee and Eccles burst into laughter and turned out to Botnick and told him basically to sling his hook, really.
Who's this long-haired dude?
Yeah.
Who's this guy driving a hearse?
Did he take the title Old Man with him?
He may have done.
Which is quite, there's so much, there's claim and counterclaim, and even Eccles saying that Neil Young had nothing to do with it, so...
Yeah, but he has actually got the credit on the album, hasn't he? So he must have been involved in some way.
He must have been. Well, they all say that. And this is a very maybe mathematical way of looking at it, but there's sort of like more people are saying who's involved to people who don't say who's involved.
Yeah,
if it makes any sense at all.
Yeah,
to sort of like play the numbers game with the straw poll. I'd say my take is the
yeah. So stand-up track on the album, what would you say?
My stand-up track on the album? That's a tough one. What's yours?
For me, it's the closer, without a doubt. You set the
scene.
I love, there's an alternate, I think on the 2000, I don't know, it's the early 2000s, I think it was around the time, just before Arthur died, they reissued it, and they had an alternate mix of, I keep banging on about this, don't I? Alternate mix of You Set the Scene, where right at the end Arthur goes into almost a little rap, and it's almost like, wow, this is You know, it was almost preceding hip hop, man. I love that version.
Well, Johnny Eccles used to say that he used to do a lot of beat poetry, and he sort of said that he had that.
Well, Gil Scott Heron, it was that.
Listened to Gil Scott Heron on the Lost Poets.
Yeah, the Lost Poets. Yeah, man, definitely. I bet he did, without a doubt. I'd imagine Arthur would have been up for that if he ever ventured outside of LA or.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's quite interesting. I'd love my hip hop friends to listen to it and see what they think of it. Really.
I love that. If you can get the. What version is it on? It's on this one. What's this reissue you've got here, mate? Is this the 2004 one or something?
It's quite an early reissue.
Yeah, I think it's the only one you can get it on. But it's, You Set the Scene, alternate mix. And of course, as well, the great thing is about this, which you don't get on the original album, is the single they released afterwards, the single on the B-side.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one thing I've got to mention, and something I've got to mention, now I know that people credit Arthur with singing and playing the arrangements, but I've got to give credit to David Angel.
Yeah, for the arrangement of the orchestral arrangement.
Yeah, who had performed in jazz and Latin bands as a youth. He worked on Bonanza and Lassie, which I find quite amazing.
But I think when Arthur went to him with these ideas, what he could hear in his head, and Angel just put it out there, didn't he? Just orchestrated it.
It's kind
amazing.
Of, somebody.
The strings on this album,
arguably the most distinctive, sustained orchestration in rock music history.
Probably. Yeah. For me, there's not many other albums that do it. Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of other great orchestral albums, really. Yeah, without going into the shitty sort of horrible sort of prog stuff of the mid-70s, you know.
It's about strings on albums, isn't it? Because sometimes
it's how it's done.
Like a pastiche. Sometimes it can sound very just ornate.
Yeah.
But I don't.
Yeah, you don't want it to sound like Moody Blues.
You don't want it to sound pushed.
No.
You don't want it to sound like it's just added on.
You don't want it to sound like Yes.
Yeah. You don't want it to like it's just added on, and I don't think it does. I think it genuinely is a piece of orchestral music.
Yeah. It sounds like, and that's a great thing when he did the album live. And I think he played Glastonbury that year. He toured all over Britain, and countless venues.
Yeah.
It was, with an orchestra, so you saw it and it was performed all at once.
Interestingly enough, David Angel went on to be a teacher and lecturer.
Did he really?
Yeah.
But the fact that he reproduced this live, I can't. If anybody wants to. Go on YouTube and have a look.
I won't go for You Set the Scene because you won't for that one. I'll go for The Red Telephone.
What of your standout track?
Yeah, because I think that it's so
great. Arthur Lee pessimistic opening lyric to that as well.
Yeah, no,
sitting
definitely.
on a hillside, watching all the
people die.
I feel much better on the other side.
Yeah.
No, I love The Red Telephone too, man. I love every track on that album. It's so hard to pick a standout, isn't it? But
it's like the duality of him, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of like, it's a very interesting song. It's sort of like built around this sort of focused by chords.
Yeah.
And it's got a harpsichord. It's got a very lovely 12-string acoustic on it. The themes include like racial imprisonment and death.
Yeah.
The lyrics are very dark and very paranoid. Some people
like every song on the
album to Syd Barrett.
Yeah. There's a lot of Syd Barrett in his lyrics, I think. Yeah, definitely.
It's sort of like a treaty.
Especially the Syd Barrett solo stuff.
Yeah, it's sort of like a treaty on the futility of the sentimentality of the summer of love, I think.
Yeah.
Watching the Vietnam War grow and become more despicable, I think Arthur Lee became really disillusioned with the optimism of the hippie movement. And where there was, where was the actual love, I think Arthur Lee was saying.
Yeah.
And a lot of this idea of love was a lie. And as a black man in a white world, in the rock world, I think he felt like an outsider. And I think Red Telephone captures that.
Yeah, it does.
Because the outro about racial imprisonment, about, they're locking us up today. They're throwing away the key.
Yeah.
And that's brilliant.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a coda of you're all normal when we want our freedom.
Yeah.
And things like that. I think I
That's
absolutely love
track.
it. I love it. I love it because I'd really like somebody who is musically very proficient to take me through it, because to me it doesn't seem to work on normal song structure, like the verse chorus, chorus.
But I don't think he did he? Lyrically as well. I mean, it's so different to, and this is what I mean, when I first heard it, I'd never heard anything like that in my life. Well, you can't pin it down.
I think
if you explain what the album is,
because of like it's in a F flat major.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, it's not just your typical rock chords.
Borders into jazz, doesn't it? Fusion, a bit of everything, really.
Yeah.
A bit of soul, a bit of...
I think that different sort of like key that it starts in.
Yeah.
And because of his like differing lyrical meter, they have to have something that breeds familiarity, and they do that with the chord progressions, which are really beautiful and really lovely, amazing. I think, you know. And Spanish guitar intro on.
How would you define the album? That's what I mean. How do you explain that album to somebody? How would you, if you said, right, with most albums you can say, well, it sounds a bit like, or it reminds me of. I don't think you can do that with Forever Changes. You can't say, you try to explain to somebody what that album sounds like. You can't, can you? Other than listen to it.
I think it's a very musically proficient record is what I think it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very musical album, and... Although I think one thing that really describes it brilliantly is it's one of the most LA records, and it's multicultural. The band are multicultural. The music is multicultural.
Yeah,
you have blues, you have jazz, you have the African American influence of blues and jazz, and then you have the Hispanic influence of like flamenco. And I think maybe one of the reasons why it doesn't become cheesy in terms of its use of like Tijuana brass and sort of like flamenco music on the trumpets is it's more influenced by Spanish mariachi than Mexican mariachi.
There's a lot of mariachi.
Yeah, so like it's sort of like...
it's almost done in the Johnny Cash kind of way, isn't it?
You know, Alone Again Or is fantastic when it doubles in... it's got that beautiful guitar intro, and then it doubles in speed and doubles in time.
Yeah.
And the band kick in with each other, and... Arthur, you can hear Arthur sort of like really come in really strong. It's absolutely... I think Alone Again Or is an absolutely fantastic piece of...
it's a great opening track, isn't it?
It was meant to have banjos on the intro.
Yeah.
But Eccles and McLean, despite being really arrogant about it, they rented some, but they found they couldn't play them. And so because of this, they sort of shelved the idea, and they were sort of like mucking around really, and Eccles was noodling with like flamenco parts on his guitar, and they were sort of playing to warm up. He was playing like Spanish riffs, and they sort of that's sort of the idea flamenco, and it came about.
Would you think then, because they got the Wrecking Crew in, because they weren't playing right when those first few sessions, that made them up their game massively?
Well, it did, didn't it? You watched Love Story, and they were in the studio watching the Wrecking Crew.
Because it would anyway, wouldn't it? See, musicians like that playing, would you, right, I need to up my fucking game a bit and play this tight.
Yeah,
and they did, didn't they?
This is my fucking
and I credit them massively for that, because they could have just gone, all right, we'll let them do it. Like, a lot of other bands at that time in the 60s did with sessions musicians, they got that.
Well, the Byrds didn't play on Mr. Tambourine Man, did they?
No, that's very true.
There's rumoured that them didn't play on Baby Please Don't Go.
Yeah. So, it was happening. But they were quite happy to just sit back and take the credit for it. And I love the fact that they didn't do that. Love didn't do that. They upped their game, and they released one of the greatest albums ever made.
Yeah, one vital song, I think, on that album that is like a historical document of the time is A House Is Not a Motel.
Yeah, great tune.
Which I think is one of the greatest and stands out tracks on the album. I think, doesn't it have one of the greatest howls, one of Arthur Lee's greatest howls on it as well, which I love. It's interesting how it's inspired by a Hal David and Burt Bacharach song, A House Is Not a Home.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting
like
song.
My Little Red Book off the first album.
which is how they punk that up.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And like...
I think Arthur he loved the Bacharach arrangements, didn't he?
Yeah,
the strings. You think of the strings and stuff
on the radio, and at the time, you had a radio that was playing something like The Doors, and then was playing something like What's New Pussycat. Or something, what I mean? And Arthur Lee and all of them said they wanted to take all this influence in. And
they did. It was a melting pot, wasn't it? A melting pot on an album.
Yeah, because A House Is Not Motel is a very interesting song with that sort of descending, ascending melody. And definitely one of Arthur Lee's more snarling. It's got more in common maybe with the punkish attitude of the first albums, really, hasn't it? And
yeah, definitely.
It's got a 12-string guitar in E minor, and definitely Vietnam is ringing.
Yeah, it is. The paranoia and the fear.
The inhumanity of war, the immorality of war, the impending apocalypse. You know, Eccles' guitar sounds like you're in a crossfire in Southeast Asian jungle.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
I mean? It's like,
I've always thought that'd make a great soundtrack, you know. Why a lot of these songs have not been used. You think of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah.
Or something like that would have been perfect, wouldn't it? Platoon, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's rare though as well, because it's one of the odd songs that doesn't have orchestration on it, and it has a drum break.
Yeah.
Which the drums really convey the violence.
Yeah.
Simmering in the track, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's sort of like really like
tribal as well.
Yeah,
very tribal feel.
The lyrics are inspired by going to a Janis Joplin concert and meeting a vet who sat down with Eccles and Arthur Lee about and spoke to them about Vietnam, and that's where the lyrics have been inspired by. Was it
again Arthur just listening, taking it all in, and pouring it out in his own beautiful way, really.
It's interesting about the apocalypse, because going back to the Red Telephone, the title refers to the Cold War crisis hotline between American
that's right,
and leaders. So like that's sort
there's so much subtext in this album, isn't there, lyrically and musically, because
the music. It's an historical
music
document, I think. You know, it's like it really does tune in into the time.
Don't you think that's what's so perfect about the orchestration, the arrangement, is because they emphasise the lyrics.
Oh,
do you not think if this album didn't have that, I don't think those lyrics would hit home so hard?
Yeah, that's it. I just love it on a musical level where it doesn't stick to verse-chorus structures. Very unusually, it doesn't have any backwards effects. It doesn't have any mellotrons, which were absolutely
all over
that period in time. And it does contain in Live and Let Live. It does contain "and the snot has caked against my pants and has turned into crystal," which is just one of the greatest. I don't know, one of the greatest opening lines you can ever think of. Really. The Wrecking Crew are on that. Billy Strange, Don Randing, Caroline Kane, and Hal Blaine are on it. They spent 3 weeks with David Angel, and they all arranged. Actually, I'm rolling back to the Boathouse. Apparently, he sat with David Angel for 3 weeks and went for the whole for the whole album. 3 weeks, because it, unlike 7 Years, which took something like
100 takes,
mammoth load of takes. Like actually, Forever Changes was recorded pretty quick.
Yeah.
So that's quite a sort of.
So why do you think then it wasn't such a hit in America at the time? Do you think that was down to lack of promotion, lack of belief in the band?
I think it's like a perfect storm. I think. I think it's partly his not wanting to tour.
Yeah, not touring the album, definitely.
Partly the success of The Doors.
Yeah, but The Doors toured their first album to death.
I'm not going to go at The Doors. Yeah. They toured.
Yeah, they worked hard.
And as Jack Holzman said, that they were very democratic.
Yeah.
And
there was no democracy.
It was a dictatorship.
It was Arthur's band. It was a dictatorship. But then I think things wouldn't have got done if it hadn't have been, and we wouldn't have had. Because to me, Arthur Lee...
As Ian Hunter said, you wouldn't have one man's vision. Really.
No, and Arthur Lee was love at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, definitely.
As he proved when he toured it, when he came out of prison.
Yeah.
That was just magical. I can't emphasise enough. If people can go out and watch that, even just watch the Glastonbury, the full set of Glastonburys on YouTube.
Well, still going and a contemporary, and have been around for quite some time themselves, is the Brian Jonestown Massacre.
Yeah, well, we need to do a podcast on them soon.
I think we really need to do a podcast.
I think we should do one on Dig.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, but again, the same sort of thing. One man's vision. Definitely just, one man's band, really.
Definitely, he's a visionary, definitely,
Yeah.
It's mad that Jack Holzman was manager of Queen in the US only, and then Carly Simon. But I think one of the things I do love about this band is they influenced one band that I really like in the MC5 and one band that I really, really love, and that's the Stooges.
Yeah, yeah.
And that they sang to Electra as well.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
influenced by love. So that a lot of my love for love comes from the influence.
And that's the thing, I think, with
really
this band. Not, they weren't replicated, but they influenced so much. I couldn't say there's another band that sounds like them, because there isn't. But I think anybody that was a great musician loved, especially Forever Changes. It changed their lives. It changed their outlook. It changed their what you could do with music.
No, definitely. And it's one guy's exploration of darker themes like obsession, and mortality, and a real creeping disillusionment with the '60s counterculture.
And I don't think they couldn't have topped the album. I mean, they broke up anyway after it, didn't they? Love carried on with Arthur. They went on to make For Sale, which completely different record. A couple of good tunes on it. It's not one of my favourite Love albums. They're completely different sounding. But I think that was their moment, wasn't it? That album, if you're going to listen to any Love album, without doubt,
you go for Forever Changes. I know there's those that go for Da Capo, but I know Jack White's a very big Da Capo fan. But
I love Da Capo, man. I love Da Capo, but there's a lot of other albums that sound like that at the time. A lot of the garage band albums sound like that at the time. And I think, Da Capo was leaning into Forever Changes. There's moments on it.
Where would you go after you set the scene? What would you choose then?
I'd probably go with Red Telephone, man, or House is Not,
Because I quite like I like Bummer in the Summer.
Bummer in the Summer's a nice...
With that country style picking by McLean, and then that piano.
It's almost pastiche, isn't it? It's almost... Yeah.
And the way it transforms into sort of real life Bo Diddley shuffle.
Yeah.
That I sort of... which is, it's funny because it's actually a song about him wanting to be monogamous with his girlfriend. Which is very against the sort of...
That was his bummer.
The tenure of the time. That was his bummer in the summer, And that really rhythmic vocal performance, which is really strutting, perhaps a bit Dylan, subterranean Homesick Blues influenced, I don't know. And that country solo,
that's a great thing on this album as well, isn't it? No two tracks sit together, lead into each other. Every track is so diverse to the next one. Even though it's an orchestral, overall an orchestral album, every song from one to the next is a surprise. I remember the first time I listened to it, you just didn't know what was coming next. And then next again, and then next again. It would blow your mind, every track.
Well, if there's any Stone Roses fans out there, it is the album that bonded the Stone Roses with John Leckie, and they both decided it was one of the greatest albums of all time.
Sure, shouldn't they? And Bobby Gillespie, as we on the documentary, isn't there?
And Manny as well. Yeah. So they were a massive influence on
a lot of the 90s, sort of indie stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even into a Britpop, really, with a lot of the string stuff, I think there's a lot. Gene, My Morning Glory, a lot of that stuff, Spiritualized.
Yeah.
Verve.
Yeah.
I think, I was saying to you the other day, wasn't I? Richard Ashcroft's Song for the Lovers.
Yeah.
The start of that could be a love track.
Because, it's interesting listening to somebody talk about Shangri-La by the Kinks, which is a song that I absolutely adore.
Yeah, me too.
And it was like one part of it, because it's very segmented and structured in a very old-fashioned, very a la Forever Changes, a very a la Day in the Life, I think.
Yeah.
And it's got a piece of symphonic music that sounds very Forever Changes.
Yeah, definitely.
So it'd be quite mind-blowing to think that Ray Davies and Dave Davis were influenced by that.
Yeah, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So all we can say really is just go out and listen to this album. Isn't it?
Yeah, go out and listen to the band, and definitely listen to, if you want a starting point, I would go with Alone Again or for one song.
Yeah, we'll just and then leave the rest of the album on.
yeah. If you can't do Alone Again or I don't know where the hell you can.
It's not a singles album, is it?
It's not a singles album, no.
The singles didn't do well of it anyway.
It has been compared to Sgt. Pepper's, it has been compared to Pet Sounds, it has been compared to Aftermath as well.
But it's better than all of them.
It's right up there with them.
It's right up there.
It's right up there with them, I think.
Right up there.
My opinion. I don't know. But it is right up there with them. And The Independent voted it the greatest psychedelic rock album of all time and the most authentic article to do with the Summer of Love. So
high praise.
High praise indeed from the big.
So what are we up for next then? Are we up for a bit of the Brian Jonestown Massacre?
I think we should do the Brian.
We were talking about the Smiths the other day as well, weren't we?
Yeah.
There's just so much we could talk about.
Yeah,
really.
I think it's endless, isn't it?
Yeah.
The possibility is endless.
Are we going for the Jonestown then?
We could do Gigi Allen and the Murder Junkies.
We could do. Or shall we just surprise our listeners?
I think we should just surprise them and hope they tune in.
Yeah, well, thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys.
Hope you've enjoyed it, and just go and, if you love the album anyway, then hopefully you've agreed with what we said. If you can add some stuff in the comments, try and put some comments, maybe we'll put it up on the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And
please put some comments and anything that you disagree with or agree with.
Yeah,
please
definitely.
comment and I'll get back to you. We'll both get back to you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.